All right, fantasy sport fans. Got co-host here, Seth Price. How are you, Seth?
I'm dandy.
Dandy?
I'm dandy.
Are you switching gears? Like, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the difference between fantasy football and fantasy baseball?
We're dipping into baseball?
We are going to dip in. This is the time of year. Not much is going on with fantasy football. A lot of people are into the whole fantasy baseball thing. I know I have a few leagues. I know you have a few leagues. But some people are wanting to know if they did want to try out fantasy baseball, what's the main differences between fantasy football and fantasy baseball? Not much.
That was me chewing tobacco. Baseball players do that.
Or sunflower seeds.
Or sunflower seeds.
Or like Josh Hamilton quit doing in the middle of the season and then start doing terrible again.
That's awkward.
All right, but we're going to tell you the main differences between them. One of the main differences that you come across, fantasy football. In fantasy football, you only start 10 players. You know, you start your quarterback, your receivers, your running backs, your tight ends, your kickers, and defenses. Not in fantasy baseball. Fantasy baseball, in average leagues, you have about 23 overall starters, 13 more players than fantasy football.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and 9 of those players are pitchers. Which obviously with pitchers, they're not going to play every game. They're going to play every 5 games, you know, so you're not going to have them every single day. But that's still a huge difference in the roster size.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely dealing with a completely different roster. Obviously, you have, you know, typically the same positions. Instead of a quarterback, obviously you have your pitchers instead of
but
running
9
back.
of them.
Yeah, and instead of a running back, guess what? You have 3 outfielders, you know, and tight ends. Instead of tight ends, you have second basemen, you know, or shortstops, or however you want to compare things. You know, you can do it any way you want, but regardless, you're definitely dealing with a lot more positions.
Yeah, the size of the roster is just so much larger in fantasy baseball, you know, and that kind of leads us to our next thing. In the amount of time that the season is played, in baseball, there's 162 games, 164 games, you know. In football, there's 16 weeks. So, and that's of the regular season. So fantasy football, you usually have 13 weeks of the regular season of fantasy football. And then most leagues, you know, week 14 and 15 is the playoffs, or maybe 15 and 16 if you're brave enough to actually make the last week of the NFL your championship season.
Oh, I'm brave.
Are you brave?
I'm brave.
Yeah.
I won't even cry.
You didn't even cry. But, yeah, in fantasy baseball, there's around 23 weeks of the regular season. You know, that's 10 more weeks that you're having to pay attention to your team. Depending on which kind of baseball league you pick, some of them are daily, some of them are weekly, but we'll kind of get into that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But, so, in a way, you have to have all those positions. You have to have more positions than fantasy football because there's more weeks, and you're not starting your players every single day like your pitchers.
That's right. You're not. And, you know, just, I can't even say any better than that.
You can't say any better than that. All right, we'll move to number 2. One of the main differences are the roto head-to-head leagues. In fantasy baseball, there's a type of league that all of the categories matter. The stat categories matter. Whenever you're facing somebody, whoever has the most home runs, whoever has the most runs, whoever has the most RBIs, whoever has the most stolen bases, and so on and so forth, you get points for having more. So say me and you are going up against each other. Whoever has the most home runs on our team, you get 1 point for that. Whoever has the best batting average, you get 1 point for that.
And when you're talking about point, are you talking about daily points or weekly points?
No, weekly points. It's a weekly matchup from Monday to Sunday. It just takes your overall stats, your categories, and whoever has the best, whoever wins the most categories wins that week. In fantasy football, we don't have that.
No.
We go on a strict point-based system. It's points, points, points.
That's right. It's strictly points by points. That's why it's so hardcore. But I will say, if you don't have a whole lot of time and you only can look at your lineup on the weekends, then this might be a good lineup for you if you're playing baseball, because you're setting up your lineup once a week. You're setting it. It's going to roll out on Monday whenever the games start. It's going to end Sunday night whenever the last game on Sunday night baseball is played. and you can reset your lineup, and do all
You
your
don't have to
moves and
set
so
it up
forth.
every single day like some of the leagues.
Exactly. So for people who have a busy schedule, this might be a good league for you.
Yeah, and moving on to the next point, that's one of the main things. Baseball games are played every single day. There's 160 some odd games throughout the
162.
year. 162. So if you don't have time to pay attention, there's a weekly set of baseball leagues that you can just set your lineup up for the entire week. You don't have to look at it, until that Sunday night for the next week. But the downfall, if your player gets injured, you can't take him out of the lineup and swap him for somebody else. You just have to roll with the guy throughout the entire week.
That's right. And guess what? If the guy gets injured Monday night, you just lost out on that spot for the entire week.
Yeah, baseball.
That's Tuesday through Sunday, people.
You just have to be a little more dedicated for fantasy baseball, especially if you're doing those weekly. The points matchups are getting a lot more popular. A lot more people are wanting to do the head-to-head points that, you get a single, you get 1 point. If you get a triple, you get 3 points. If you get a home run, you get 4.
Because it's more similar to fantasy football. And people, once they play fantasy football and they start going into other fantasy sports like basketball and like this, what we're talking about baseball, the weekly matchup, yeah, you're dealing with stat categories, and people get turned off by it. And they want to be like, gosh, man, I want it exactly the way I had it in fantasy football. Well, this is how you get it. You play different leagues, like the one we're talking about. It's called a head-to-head points league. And this league is pretty similar to fantasy football point-wise. You get the points from your players. It's not stat categories where you're trying to beat the other category out of so many different categories. No. All your points are combined. You get a total points at the end of the day. And come Sunday night, whoever had the more points, guess what? You win.
Yeah, and it's just up to the person. If you're the type of guy that can look at your lineup once every night or once in the morning, a couple of times a day, and you're that into it, you can do the daily head-to-head point leagues where you just play a matchup for an entire week. Or if you're the type of person that has a busy schedule, you can do the head-to-head points that just last the entire week. That's not the daily, So if you don't have a lot of time and you're not too worried about having to set up your lineup every single day, there are options that are out there for you.
Yeah, and baseball, they're real flexible with all those options. Unlike football, you don't have a whole lot of options, but baseball, you do. When it comes to football, there's different types of drafts, like auction drafts, regular drafts, snake drafts, different types of leagues, 2 QB leagues, stuff like that. But when it comes to baseball, guess what, man? It comes down to weekly matchups versus day-to-day matchups, roto matchups versus head-to-head points, different types of matchups like that. And it just all comes down to how dedicated are you to that league.
Yeah, so if you're a big fantasy football fan, if you're a big football fan and you're a big baseball fan and you just haven't decided to play fantasy baseball yet because you think that it's too hard to figure out or it's too different than fantasy football points wise, then there's different options. You can still set it up to where you get points from your players, and that, I think that just kind of scares people away from playing it.
Yeah. Just make sure if you are getting into a fantasy baseball league that is head-to-head points, and you guys set it up daily, you can reset up your lineup every single day before the games start. And believe me, people in your league are going to do that. And if you're not paying attention to it, you're going to lose.
Yeah,
Majority of the time.
You have games that go on rain delays. Sometimes you have double headers, so you're getting double points for players, and then you're losing out because your pitcher's being moved 5 days ahead of schedule, because it got rained out and they didn't want to start him.
Yep.
There's just so many different aspects to fantasy baseball, but don't let it scare you away. If you're scared of the MLB, if you're a fan of fantasy sports, check out fantasy baseball. A lot of people are doing it right now, and we just wanted to throw in a little podcast on our side about it.
Yeah, and just so you know, baseball, if you're very competitive, you're a very competitive person, I suggest day-to-day. Every single time.
Day-to-day points is just the way that I enjoy to do it, but a lot of people like that whole category thing. It's just like with fantasy basketball.
Yep, absolutely. Well, That's what we got. Football versus baseball. If you have questions, if you have comments, just throw it in our comments section on this podcast, and we'll be able to answer those questions for you. You can even leave a voicemail for us. We'll have that. We have that set up on our website. Leave a voicemail. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think. And you have questions, shoot them to us. We'll be glad to talk to you about it. Take it easy. Hey, Seth here with FantasySportFans.com. Hey, be sure to enter your name and your email on our website to get instant access to our free beginner's guide of fantasy football. By subscribing, you will get free Fantasy Sport Fans updates, tips, and Fantasy Sport Fan news with no spam.